Welcome to This Explainer. We're diving right in today because we've got a massive topic: decoding the ultimate measure of a country's economic health. You know, if you ever watch the news, you hear a ton of intimidating financial jargon thrown around. But today, we're cutting straight through that noise. We're going to look at the single metric that literally powers decision-making across the globe. By the time we're done, you're going to see the global economy with absolute clarity.
So imagine someone walks up to you and asks, "Hey, how healthy is our country's economy?" At first, you're probably thinking, well, that's straightforward. But wait, think about what an economy actually is. It's this beautiful, absolute chaos. You've got millions of people buying everyday stuff, millions of workers earning paychecks, thousands of businesses making new products, governments building giant bridges, and global trade zooming across borders every single second. How in the world do you take all of that immense activity and boil it down into just one understandable number?
Well, here's our roadmap for this explainer. Step 1, we'll introduce the economy's report card. 2, we'll break down the actual GDP formula. 3, we'll look at the surprising things GDP actually leaves out. 4, why this matters to your daily life. And finally, step 5, the limits of GDP. Let's get into it.
Starting off with Section 1, the economy's report card. We're defining the ultimate metric.
All right, let's officially introduce the hero of our story: gross domestic product. If you open up an economics textbook, you'll see a formal definition like this. Gross domestic product, or GDP, is the total value of all final goods and services produced within a country's borders during a specific period. Usually that's a year or a quarter. Now, I know that sounds a little stiff, doesn't it? Let's simplify it. Just imagine an entire country acting as one giant business. Over a year, this huge business produces food, clothes, tech, healthcare, the whole shebang. GDP just tries to measure the total value of everything that giant business just made. It measures economic output. It is, quite literally, the economy's report card.
So why do we even go through the trouble of tracking this massive number? Well, if you're running a company, you track your sales to know if you're growing, right? Countries need the exact same thing. Governments need it to track national performance. Businesses rely on it to plan their next big expansion. Investors use it to figure out where to commit capital. And central banks? They watch it like a hawk so they can set interest rates. Without GDP, decision makers around the world would be flying completely blind.
Moving on to Section 2, the GDP formula explained. Let's break down the math. Now hold on. I know some of us might tense up when we hear the word formula, but I promise you this is incredibly intuitive. We're going to take it one simple piece at a time. The very first piece is C, which stands for consumption. This is simply household spending. It's the money that you and I spend on goods and services every single day. Buying groceries, renting an apartment, paying for a haircut, or grabbing a coffee, that is all consumption. And what's wild is that for most countries, your daily spending makes up the largest single chunk of their entire GDP. Next up, we have our second component, investment, represented by the letter I. Now, when beginners hear the word investment, they instantly think of buying stocks on a trading app. But in economics, it actually means something entirely different. Here, investment refers to businesses spending money on productive assets. We're talking about a company physically building a new factory, buying heavy machinery, or maybe a tech firm purchasing massive new servers. These actions physically increase a country's capacity to produce more stuff in the future. Our third piece is G, which stands for government spending. Because, hey, governments buy things too. When a government funds a new highway, builds a public school, pays for national defense, or even just pays the salaries of government workers, all of those expenditures directly contribute to economic production. They're creating jobs and output, so naturally they get added right onto our GDP report card.
Finally, we have net exports, which is represented as X minus M. This is where international trade enters the picture. X is for exports, the things we make at home and sell abroad. M is for imports, the things we buy that were made in other countries. So we take our total exports and subtract our imports. Why do we do that? Well, because GDP only measures domestic production. So if we buy a smartphone that was made in another country, we obviously can't count that as our own achievement.
Okay, let's see how this all builds together with a simple example. Imagine a small country. Let's say their consumers spend $600 billion. Their businesses invest $200 billion into new factories, the government spends $150 billion on roads and schools, and their net exports equal $50 billion. When we add up those four pillars, 600 plus 200 plus 150 plus 50, we get exactly $1 trillion. And that's it. That is how a trillion-dollar economy is calculated. It's really just those four building blocks. All right, Section 3, what GDP leaves out. Time to look at the surprising exceptions.
Now, you might be thinking that every single dollar changing hands gets counted in that massive trillion-dollar number, but actually there are some huge surprising exceptions. For example, if you go out and buy a brand new car off the lot, that definitely gets included in GDP. But what if you buy a used car from your neighbor? That transaction is completely excluded. Why? Because the used car was already counted in the GDP of the year it was originally manufactured. If we counted it again, we'd be double counting. GDP only cares about brand new production.
Here's another perfect example of this. If a company expands its factory, yep, that's included. But if you log online and buy $10,000 worth of company stock, that is totally excluded from GDP. Remember our definition from earlier? A financial transaction like buying stock is really just an exchange of paper ownership. No actual new product or service was put out into the world, so it doesn't count.
And this actually brings us to one of the biggest limitations of GDP: unpaid household work. Think about a parent who stays home. They're spending hours cooking meals, cleaning the house, taking care of the kids. That labor creates an enormous amount of real, tangible value for society. It is absolutely crucial. Yet, because there's no official market transaction, because no money is actually changing hands, it completely disappears from the GDP statistics. It's just invisible.
Moving to Section 4, why GDP actually matters. Let's talk about the real-world stakes. So, why should you, in your everyday life, care about this abstract macroeconomic metric? Well, because the stakes are incredibly real, and GDP directly impacts your personal financial security. Look at it this way. When GDP is growing, companies are selling more. That means they're hiring more workers, incomes naturally rise, and overall consumer confidence is booming. It creates this great cycle of opportunity. But when GDP is shrinking, the exact opposite happens. Businesses see lower revenue, they freeze hiring, unemployment ticks up, and we risk falling into what economists call a recession, which, simply put, is just an extended period of declining GDP. This is exactly why economists don't just look at the raw total number, they absolutely obsess over the growth rate. Let's say a country's GDP was $5 trillion last year and $5.25 trillion this year. That means the economy grew by 5%. Tracking that percentage change over time tells us the momentum of the economy. It tells us if things are speeding up or if they're slowing down.
And finally, Section 5, the limits of GDP, uncovering the nuance and the misconceptions.
As powerful as this metric is, we really need to mature our understanding here, because while GDP is a fantastic tool, it is far from a perfect measure of human success. Think of GDP kind of like a car's speedometer. It doesn't tell you everything about the vehicle. A speedometer is crucial, right? It tells you how fast the car is moving, but it tells you absolutely nothing about how much fuel you have left, whether the engine is safe, or if you're even driving in the right direction. GDP measures the speed of output, for sure, but it ignores everything else that makes a society actually function.
In fact, let's just go ahead and bust some of the most common myths out there. First myth, GDP measures wealth. False. Wealth is your accumulated assets over time. GDP just measures the production of a specific period. Second myth, GDP measures happiness. Absolutely false. Third, higher GDP always means better living standards. Not necessarily. A country can have incredibly high output but terrible healthcare or intense pollution. And finally, growth benefits everyone equally. False again. GDP doesn't tell us how the money is distributed. All those gains could be going to just a tiny fraction of the population.
So the crucial takeaway I want you to remember is this. GDP is the essential foundation for tracking output, but it is not the entire story of a nation's well-being. It's a tool, not a religion. Economists definitely use it to understand growth and recessions, but they know they have to look at other indicators alongside it, things like health, education, and equality, to really get the full picture.
You've just leveled up your financial literacy in a massive way. You now know exactly what GDP is, how it's calculated using those 4 simple pillars, and you even know its blind spots. But, as always, solving one mystery only uncovers another. If GDP tracks the growth of an economy, it leaves us with one incredibly provocative question. What actually causes economies to grow in the first place? I'm going to leave you to ponder that one. Keep exploring, keep learning, and I will see you in the next explainer.